Tonight's demo is on tool making. I've tried to mix up the way I'm presenting this. I'm not going to be doing a lot of grinding, throwing sparks everywhere. Just not real comfortable doing that on a wooden floor. I'm going to show examples of different tools that I've made, and focusing on repurposing old worn out tools or tools that you can pick up at the tool shed. How many people here have been to the tool shed in Worcester? All right. On Main Street in Worcester, there's a shop called the Tool Shed. It's open. It, Webster Square. And if you just type in, Tool Shed Worcester, the website will come up and it'll give you all the information you need. It's open Wednesday through Saturday, 1 to 5. It has used tools, and they're anywhere from half off to 10 cents on the dollar for some pretty good stuff. And they have a bargain table in the middle. 1 week it's $6, and then it goes down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 50 cents, a quarter, 2 for a quarter, until the table's emptied. When it gets down to $1.50, you can get an old screwdriver, for 50 cents, and it's good. Typically, the older ones especially are good carbon steel, and you can reshape them into custom profiles. This tool is for making a tenon when you want to just do a plunge cut on a piece of wood, and it's designed and shaped so I just push it in, move it a little bit in one direction, a little bit in the other direction. I put a piece of tape for the depth, and I'm done. I can cut a really good tenon in about 20 seconds without a lot of guesswork. I use this one a lot when I'm doing the bottle in a branch, because I just want to have a hidden tenon in the bottom that stays there forever. And I'll be passing these around after I present them. All right, so since I'm not going to be doing a lot of metal grinding, I thought I would start by just showing you a tool and then using it. And after I make a few cuts, I can part a piece of wood off, pass the tool around with a piece of wood, so you can see what it does, how it works. And to begin, I'm going to start with an old rock chisel. These are some pieces I got from the tool shed, and what I've done, it has basically a plus sign. What I've done is I've ground off some of the top and the bottom to simply make a profile, and this is intended to be a negative rake scraper. It's very hard carbon steel. It's made for chipping rock, so very sturdy. These ribs give it more rigidity, so you're not going to get any flexing on the tool. And then after doing the negative rake, I polished it, and then using a carbide burnishing tool, I rubbed a small burr on it, and I'll show you what it can do. Okay. So the first cut's going to be on the end grain. All right. So then I'm going to do a small cove. This is a piece of dry cherry. I had a sycamore branch I was going to use, and it was a little bit punky, and I would recommend to never use punky wood during a demo. All right, so I've left the rough turning a little bit rough, and then I've made a little cove and hollowed out the middle a little bit. Now I'm going to use a parting tool, part this off, and I can pass it around so you can see the results from basically a 50-cent piece of steel and maybe an hour's worth of grinding, shaping, and heat treating. And this is a thin kerf parting tool, a very simple handle, and it's completely adjustable. So the blade is a recycled Sawzall blade with the teeth ground off, and this is kind of a before and after. And one of the challenges with having a thin kerf parting tool is when it's really long, you get a lot of flex, you can get some twisting, and things can go bad really quick. So with this handle, I made a notch between two pieces of wood and then screwed them together. And now this can slide all the way in, or you pull it out just as far as you need it. So that keeps it a little stronger, a little more rigid. And I have the set screws to hold it in place. You could use it so that this part is cutting, but that puts stress and causes a little bit of wobble. If you have the lower edge cutting, I find it to be a little more stable. So I always put a little teeny angle on the bottom edge, get it nice and sharp, and then I present it with the base of the tool in a more stable position. Make sure that's tight. And just because I'm always losing these things, I drilled a hole in the back of the tool So now it has a home. I could just plunge this straight in and it would start with a scraping cut. What I prefer to do is come in at a high angle and try to do as much of a slicing cut as I can, and then lift the handle as I go into the tool, into the wood. It didn't do that over the weekend. And as you could see, at home, when I first made this tool, I was able to just push in and go straight through before it started to burn. I think I had made a few little adjustments after that, and what I probably did was taper the front just a little bit. And because I did that, the cutting edge was a little bit smaller than the thickness, and that causes a little bit of friction. So when you make these, be really careful not to taper the front. To fix it, when I get home, I'm just going to grind off maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and it should bring it back so that I don't get the rubbing, which causes it to heat up. Both. I need to be really careful with CBN because a lot of times I have mystery steel, and I need to be mindful of anything where I'm not sure. I'll go to a natural or like a bluestone, and I have used it's like a slick stick to put onto the CBN wheel. It's supposed to make it so you could grind copper and it wouldn't clog, but it really makes the wheel look ugly, and Mike and I have had mixed results with it. So I won't, you can try it, but early on I did a lot of work with a 4.5-inch angle grinder, and Bad Dog Tools makes a diamond 4-inch grinding wheel that's guaranteed for life. It's like a 36 grit, and you can just grind all day with that, and it moves metal really quick, and if it ever wears out, they'll replace it. So if you're going to do a lot of work, I'd recommend that. If you have a clean CBN wheel and you put a piece of steel to it that's mild steel, non-carbon steel, it can actually clog the grit. It won't break the grit, but it'll fill the space between the grit. If aluminum, brass, there's a whole range of metals that will clog it up. There's like a lubricating stick you can add to it, and I thought, oh great, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I loaded up the wheel with it, and it looks bad. So I'm a little weary to tell people to use it. If you want to come over, you can look at my wheels. They still cut, but they look like crap. Just another plug for using old screwdrivers that are made from high carbon steel. Here's an example of a very simple round nose scraper. This is another scraper, and it's been designed for my bottle stoppers that are like mushrooms. So I like to have a little bit of a hollow in the bottom of the mushroom cap, and this tool gets in there and makes a nice clean hollow. And again, it was real simple to heat, bend this, and then grind it to shape. And then this tool, if I just want to make any pretty much any kind of a straight or V cut, I can just plunge it in and get the shape I want. If I want a certain custom shape, I just grind it to whatever that shape is. And I'll pass these around so you can see how that goes. And this was another one I made for the mushroom, and this was for the undercut, and then this would be for the stem. And I designed it so that I could plunge it in, make the shape of the stem, do the undercut, come around, and practically do the entire mushroom with a single tool that had all the profiles on it. That was an old chisel. It was just a carpenter's chisel, but it looked like hell. It was completely beat up. I love freehand grinding. I'll basically cut out a paper or cardboard template, and I'll take that mushroom that I spent a lot of time with 5 different tools making, and I'll just hold the mushroom up, sketch a pattern, cut it out in paper, make a 1-inch strip, and hold it up and say, okay, I could come in this way, move that way, adjust it, and then I transfer it to a piece of metal and just go to a bench grinder. And completely by eye, I'll make the shape. Now, if I want a perfect radius, let me find the tool. If I want a really clean, perfect radius, I'll get this by the end of the night. I'll use a Dremel tool, and I'll find whatever diameter stone wheel that matches the radius I want. And before I use the Dremel tool, because it'll wear out really fast, I'll use a thin cutoff wheel and get this close to the shape. Then I'll come in with the Dremel tool and get the perfect radius, and then I have the shape. So it's pretty much anything that removes metal you can use to do this. An 8-inch 60 grit grinding wheel goes really fast, and then to do the finish work, a Dremel tool that gives you the control that you need. This tool I made for doing captive rings, and the idea was I wanted as many captive rings on a baby rattle as I could get. So instead of guessing how many I could get, I measured it out, and I figured out that the space of these 2 wings was the tightest space I could use to then get the tool that comes in and basically separates the captive ring. So now all I have to do is plunge it in, until the very tip touches, take it out, and then the other tool, which I couldn't find yesterday, would just come in and remove the bottom part of the wood. And I'll show you how this works. Hopefully it'll cooperate. And I got a catch. And we'll try this one more time. All right. What's that? I think so. That's probably what did it. So instead of continuing, what I've done is removed a large part of the bead so you can see the profile better. I meant for that to happen. I actually had changed a couple of the grinds on this last night, and I did not pay close attention to it. So I changed the profile just enough to have it kept. To prevent that, what I'm going to need to do is make sure the tips of these tools are definitely wider and they taper down a little bit so that I don't have the rest of the tool rubbing as it goes. And then make sure the outer edges have a good sharp edge as well as the inner edges. So when you make a custom profile, you need to be really mindful of what's making contact with the wood and where the cutting edges are. And if you have metal sticking out that's only rubbing, then that's what can happen. Now, my inspiration for this tool was this, which I believe I've seen a number of these kinds of handles, and they've got to be 40, 50 years old or older. And I believe they were designed, to hold something like a reciprocating saw blade and just cut by hand. But if you grind off the teeth, put it in, move the set screw, it makes a really handy, small, simple parting tool. And I'll pass both of these around so you can get a feel for the basic design. And I love being inspired by that old tool and saying, boy, if it was a little bit bigger, And an example of simply repurposing a tool. This is I believe a reaming bit for metalworking. I got it at the tool shed. It has 3 carbide edges brazed into it, and I put a small round on one of the carbide blades, a larger round on the other one, and the last one I left completely square. And the way I envision using this tool, put it into a handle, and when I'm making boxes, if I want a square edge at the very bottom of the box, I'd use cutter number 1. If I want a small radius, cutter number 2. If I want a bigger radius, cutter number 3. And I just bring it in, it'll clean up the bottom, give me that radius, pull it out, it'll clean out the walls, and it'll stay sharp for a good long time. And another example is another stone chisel. This is made to go into a jackhammer type tool. Very close to the final shape I want it to be. I just made the profile go into a knife edge, polish the edge, and I love rubbing a burr. And with this, it makes a beautiful scraper. So I'll demo the scraper and one more tool. It's mostly when I want to make a certain shape and using my existing tools, it's taking too long, or I get close and then I ruin it, and so I remove some more wood and I keep going. And I say, if I only had a tool with this profile, this size and this shape, it would be a lot easier. And then I walk away from the lathe, I pick up an old screwdriver, and I just make it. Occasionally, I'll see something else, and I'll look at it and like, wait, if you modify that and then change it just a bit, it might work. Now, I've got a whole bunch of tools at home that didn't work. So for me, it's as much fun as wood turning, coming up with the tool, and then when I get to use the tool to do more turning, it's even better. So I'm going to take a chance, and if I can get this spalted wood to come out clean and smooth, then I know I made a good tool here. And if it's rough after I'm done, it's because of the wood. It works much better if the burr is facing up. Not too bad. If it was forged in fire, I would say eat will cut. And as you'll see on this tool, most of my handles have a set screw. So the actual tool can be removed. Quite often I'll make a tool and I don't want to take an hour or two to make a handle, so I'll swap them out as many times as I need to. One more example of a tool. This is an old tire iron, basically for changing out a truck tire. I think it's pretty big, and it was pretty much all this shape. All I've done is grind it down, and I haven't ground it to a completely sharp edge because I still need to heat treat it. So before I heat treat, I leave about a 32nd of an inch thickness so I'm not burning the knife edge. And then after it's heat treated, then I'll put the final grind into it. Okay, heat treating. So there's two kinds of heat treating. There's the high temperature for forging, bending, and shaping the metal. So I'll pass this around, and I would recommend everyone, if you're interested, just Google heat treating metal, and you'll get a whole bunch of information on it. So at different temperatures, you can make metal move. If it's too cold, you can make the metal brittle and break. If it's too hot, you can burn the metal, or you could turn it into liquid. So you have to find that perfect sweet spot. Now, when I started doing this, I read a book and it said, when it's cherry red, you can hammer it. Well, cherry red in bright sunlight, cherry red with a fluorescent bulb, and cherry red at nighttime are three different colors. So, a foolproof method is to use a magnet. Most of the steel you'd be working with is magnetic. When it gets to about 1500 degrees, the temperature you want to be moving the metal at or hardening it, it's no longer magnetic. That's when you know you're at the right temperature and you can quench it to harden it or hammer it to make it move. Oil. They do make W1 tool steel, which is designed for quenching in water. So from a safety perspective, if you want to buy W1 tool steel, you can use that to make your tools and you only need water. I use vegetable oil, and a long time ago when we had a fryer, I only used the used oil, and whenever I'd quench a tool, it smelled like French fries. And if you're worried about cholesterol, then use olive oil. If you're all done and the tool's not working right, just go back to the forge or the fire or the torch and try it again. My favorite is a wood fire, basically a fire pit in the backyard, and I have a blower, and whether it's one designed for a coal forge or it's a leaf blower, doesn't matter. All you need to do is have hot coals, have air blowing on it until you hit the right temperature, and then you test it with a magnet. If you pull it out and the metal breaks in half by itself, you got it too hot. But it's a lot of work to get metal to that point. This the 1500 degrees, quenching it in oil, that makes the metal hard. I've taken tools straight from the hardening, ground them, used them, and then I decided to put a burr on one, and it just, the whole edge chipped off. It was too brittle. So to make it a little bit softer without losing the hardness, you need to temper it. And tempering, you would heat it up anywhere from 400 to 500 degrees. And that makes it soft enough so it won't chip. And with, with the really thin metal, if it's super brittle, it's just going to shatter immediately. One thing I'd like to note, when I make these parting tools, sometimes the saw blade is, if it on the label it says bimetal, it means the cutting edge is something like a cobalt tool steel, and then the steel behind it is simply carbon steel. So when you grind the teeth off, stop as soon as you get to the bottom, because you only have maybe 1/8 of an inch of the tool steel on that edge. And when you do the small little bevel cut here, don't go too far. Always keep it really close to that bottom surface. And I typically don't heat treat these because they're already designed to be a little bit flexible for the cutting, and I don't want to soften it too much or make it too brittle. So this is typically a case where I wouldn't do heat treating. And here's a temperature scale and a color scale for the tempering. And on this tool, there's an example of the heat tint, and it goes through a pretty good range of the color you would get. So these pieces of metal here were heat treated in an oven, so they're very consistent. This tool I used to torch, so it has the whole rainbow effect. And I'll pass both of these and the tool as an example. What I'm showing you now applies to simple high carbon steel. Now it can be high carbon tool steel, but I can't promise you consistent results. That's where a little bit of trial and error comes in. People have, you can get a master's or a PhD in metallurgy and how to treat metals. And you can talk to Mike Smith about some of the complexities of tool steels. And I love using the old tool bits. This is one of my favorite tools. It's a big chunk of electric ultra cobalt. Really holds a good edge, very sturdy, and I literally just took a tool bit, rounded the corners, and hammered it into a piece of square tube steel, and it holds solid, and it does an amazing job of rough cutting and doing a super fine finish cut. And this, I would never try to heat treat that because it's, that's beyond my knowledge base, and I don't have to heat treat it because it's such durable steel. My advice is just don't use files. One of the biggest problems, in addition to the heat treating, is the grooves in the file make a weak point, and under constant load, that would propagate a crack and it would snap off. One of my earliest tools was an old file. I did not grind all the grooves out, and I overextended it, and I turned it into a skew, and it ended up 10 feet behind me, just the metal part. So I got lucky on that day. I was wearing a face shield, but I worry about the blue. And with these tools, you can easily turn them blue when you go aggressive. If you do that, you look at the heat tint chart that went around. That'll tell you, roughly, that you were at 600 or 700 degrees, which means you've really dropped the hardness down, and it won't hold an edge as well. At that point, you're better off getting it up until it's non-magnetic, quench it, and that will put the hardness back into it. And then carefully heat it to a straw or like a yellow color, and that'll take some of the brittleness out. You can also not do the tempering, depending on how much of the tip you heat it up, but you just have to understand that you're trading hardness for brittleness. And I didn't bring potatoes. So I would recommend normally, and one moment. One, when you're doing this kind of heat treating, I recommend doing it outside or in your garage with the door wide open, right at the edge. Always have either a fire extinguisher or a charged hose ready to put out any fires that could happen. So if you want, I will just pretend to do this. You can use propane or MAP gas. MAP gas is a little bit hotter. It'll do everything a little bit faster. And you basically just move it around. When you have a tool that comes to a sharp point, focus the flame back to the thicker part of the metal and let the heat move gradually toward the tip so you don't overheat that edge. And you'll see it start to change color. When it starts to glow red, go a little bit further. And when the magnet no longer sticks, you're at the right temperature. Plunge it straight in. You can lift it up a little bit, move it down. Now, if you're really good, you dip it in and you lift it out before it completely cools. So when it gets to about 500 degrees, you lift it up, and that will temper it at the same time, and you don't have to do the separate tempering step. It's pretty hard to guess when you get to that point. So I typically just keep it in until it's relatively cool. When you take it out, it's still hot. Don't try to touch it. Set it down, wait a few minutes, wipe it off, sand it to a bright finish, and then heat it again. And I recommend heating it till you get the straw color tint. And that will make sure that it's not too brittle, but it's still relatively hard. And the biggest thing, if you start small, make sure you have a piece of good tool steel. or carbon steel. It's fun, it's simple, and over time you can work your way up. But most importantly, you need to be safe. Never do this kind of work on your lathe when you're knee deep in wood chips. It just won't end well. I like my 8-inch grinders. Now, you've got the slow speed and the fast speed. So the high speed 8-inch grinder with a rough wheel is really good for removing metal quickly. When you're trying to hog out, you know, a, a nice angle on a piece of cobalt tool steel, you'll be there for a long time. And one thing about any of the exotic steels, you really need to have a respirator. You do not want to be breathing in cobalt dust or any of those different elements. It's just not good for you. I like to use a positive air pressure helmet whenever I'm doing this kind of work. Just you really need to protect your lungs. If you think of anything, you can always talk to me at any one of our meetings, or you can send me an email. The biggest thing is, experiment, have fun, and be safe.